Don't let them see you shaking, Elliot whispered to himself as he tightened his trembling fingers around the tray of coffee mugs. But the moment the black SUV stopped outside the diner, he already knew it was too late. Snow pressed softly against the wide front windows of Rosie's Highway Diner, frosting the glass in pale white patterns while the old neon open sign buzzed weakly above the entrance. The storm outside had turned the streets of Blackwater City silver and empty, and at nearly 2 in the morning, only truckers, exhausted night shift workers, and desperate people still wandered this far south of downtown. Elliot Hayes belonged to the last category. His lower back throbbed so badly he could barely straighten up anymore, and every movement sent pressure through his swollen stomach, so heavy it felt impossible to carry. 9 months pregnant. 9 long months of hiding. 9 months of pretending he wasn't terrified every second of every day. The diner uniform no longer fit correctly around his body. The pale blue apron strained tightly beneath the curve of his belly, and the cheap sneakers on his feet pinched against swollen ankles that ached after every shift. He rested one hand beneath his stomach as he moved between tables, breathing carefully the way the doctor at the free clinic had taught him. Slow breaths. No stress. Avoid overworking. Advice that felt almost laughable considering he worked 12-hour night shifts carrying coffee and pancakes for tips barely large enough to cover rent in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The babies shifted suddenly inside him, 3 distinct movements rolling beneath his skin, and Elliot froze beside the counter with a soft inhale. Easy, he whispered under his breath, rubbing gently across the tight fabric stretched over his stomach. We're almost there. He tried smiling despite the exhaustion hollowing out his face. The babies always moved when they sensed his stress, especially during storms, especially at night. Rosie, the elderly owner of the diner, glanced over from the register with concern written across her tired face. Kid, you need to sit down before you pass out on my floor. Elliot forced another smile. I'm okay. That's the 5th time you've said that tonight. And I'm still standing. Barely. He felt lightheaded almost constantly now. His center of gravity had changed so much that every step felt uncertain, and his Omega instincts screamed at him to rest somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere protected. But safety cost money. Warmth cost money. Existing cost money. So Elliot kept working. Outside, headlights suddenly cut through the snowstorm. Long black vehicles rolled silently to the curb one after another, sleek and expensive enough to look unreal against the dirty frozen streets. Every instinct in Elliot's body tightened at once. His pulse stumbled painfully. No. The diner door opened before he could stop himself from staring. Cold winter air swept inside first, sharp with snow and expensive cologne and something darker underneath. Power. The room changed instantly. Conversation stopped. Even the old trucker near the pie display lowered his coffee mug halfway to the table. 3 men stepped inside together, each wearing dark tailored coats dusted with snowflakes that melted against black wool. Tall, elegant, dangerous. The kind of men who looked completely out of place under flickering diner lights. Elliot's breath caught so hard it hurt. Damien Vale entered first, calm gray eyes sweeping across the diner with cold precision. Lucien followed beside him, broader shoulders tense beneath his coat, his expression carrying the same sharp hostility Elliot remembered too well. Adrian came last. Softer, quieter, but somehow worse, because Adrian had always been the one capable of looking directly into Elliot's heart without trying. The tray slipped from Elliot's fingers before he realized he had stopped breathing. Ceramic shattered across the floor in an explosion of coffee and broken white porcelain. Every head turned toward him. Silence swallowed the diner whole. Elliot stared at them in horror while one protective hand flew instinctively over his stomach. A full year. 1 entire year since he disappeared from their world without a word. 1 year since he ran before they could destroy what little remained of him. Damien's gaze landed on him first. Empty recognition flickered into stunned disbelief so quickly Elliot almost missed it. Lucien froze beside him like someone had physically struck him. Adrian looked the same way people looked when they forgot how to breathe. Elliot's throat tightened painfully. The babies moved again, harder this time. His knees nearly buckled beneath the sudden pressure low in his stomach. Not now. Please not now. He could not survive this tonight. Damien took one slow step forward. Elliot immediately stepped backward, Pure instinct. Fear flooded through him so fast it left his hands ice cold despite the overheated diner air. Because the veiled triplets were not simply powerful men. They ruled half the city from the shadows. Every politician feared them. Every criminal answered to them. Every room bent around them the second they entered. And once upon a time, Elliot had belonged to them too. Adrian's silver eyes dropped lower, down to Elliot's stomach, to the unmistakable shape hidden beneath the strained diner uniform. Elliot saw the exact second realization shattered him. Adrian's lips parted soundlessly. Lucien's face lost all color. Damien went completely still. Then Elliot smelled it. The shift in their pheromones. Shock. Possessiveness. Protective alpha instinct crashing violently into the room all at once. The air became unbearably heavy. Elliot's heart pounded so hard he thought he might faint. Damien spoke first, his voice low enough to send a familiar shiver through Elliot's spine. "Elliot," he said quietly, "why are you carrying our children?" The entire diner remained frozen in silence after Damien's question, as if nobody inside the building even remembered how to breathe anymore. Elliot felt every pair of eyes locked onto him, but the only ones that mattered were the three standing near the entrance. The veiled triplets looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. Damien still carried that terrifying calm that used to make powerful men lower their voices the second he entered a room. Lucien still radiated enough raw dominance to make Elliot's Omega instincts panic on sight. Adrian still looked at him like he was searching for answers hidden beneath his skin. But now there was something else mixed into their expressions. Shock, confusion, fear. Elliot swallowed hard and instinctively stepped backward again, one trembling hand pressed protectively over the underside of his stomach. "Do not," he whispered shakily. "Do not do this here." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The babies shifted restlessly again, reacting to the emotional storm flooding the room through alpha pheromones so dense Elliot almost felt dizzy from it. Damien noticed immediately. Elliot saw it in the subtle tightening of his jaw. The way his cold gray eyes dropped briefly to Elliot's stomach before returning to his face. A dangerous silence settled around them. Rosie finally recovered first. "Hey," she snapped nervously from behind the counter, trying to lighten the suffocating tension. "If you boys are staying, order something or stop scaring my customers." Nobody laughed. Lucien took another step forward instead. 9 months, he said quietly, staring at Elliot's stomach with an expression that looked almost unreal on someone like him. "You disappeared for 1 year and came back carrying triplets?" Elliot's throat tightened painfully. "I did not come back." Adrian finally moved closer too, slower than his brothers, careful in a way that almost hurt worse. "Elliot," he said softly, "look at you." That nearly broke him, because Adrian's voice still sounded exactly the same. Warm, gentle, familiar enough to reopen wounds Elliot spent months trying to survive. Elliot looked away immediately. "I have to work." Damien's expression darkened instantly. "You should not even be standing. That is none of your business anymore." The words came out sharper than Elliot intended, fueled by panic and exhaustion and too many sleepless nights spent alone. Lucien's eyes narrowed at once, his alpha instincts visibly fighting for control beneath the surface. "Not our business," he repeated. "You are carrying our children. I did not ask for anything from you." The room went deadly quiet again. Elliot immediately regretted raising his voice because the babies reacted sharply inside him. A sudden, painful tightening rolled through his abdomen hard enough to steal his breath. He grabbed the edge of a nearby booth with one hand while the other flew protectively over his stomach. Adrian moved instantly. "Elliot, do not touch me." Elliot backed away before Adrian could reach him. Fear flashed openly across all 3 alpha faces for the first time. Elliot hated that his body still remembered them so clearly. Damien's scent was winter smoke and cedarwood. Lucien smelled like storm clouds and expensive whiskey. Adrian carried that softer scent of clean rain and cold pine that used to calm Elliot during difficult nights. His Omega instincts recognized all 3 instantly despite the year apart. Worse, the babies recognized them too. Elliot could feel it. The restless movements beneath his skin had changed completely since the veiled triplets entered the diner. Stronger now, more reactive, as if the unborn babies already knew their fathers were near. Damien seemed to realize the same thing. His expression shifted into something unreadable as another tiny movement visibly rolled beneath Elliot's stretched uniform. "They know us," Damien said quietly. Elliot's eyes burned suddenly. "Do not. You can barely stand," Lucian snapped, his composure finally cracking. "Why are you working in a place like this?" Elliot laughed once under his breath, hollow and exhausted. "Because rent still exists." Lucian looked genuinely shaken by that answer. Because once upon a time Elliot had lived inside penthouses with marble floors and private elevators and closets larger than this entire diner kitchen. Once upon a time, he never worried about money or safety or surviving winter storms alone. Once upon a time, he belonged to the most powerful men in Blackwater City. Until he heard Damien discussing contingency plans after Elliot's pregnancy scare nearly a year ago. Until he overheard Lucian say an heir could become a weakness enemies would exploit. Until fear convinced him that the babies growing inside him would eventually become a problem the Vale Empire could not afford. So he ran before they could decide his future for him. Adrian's voice pulled him back to the present. "Why did you not tell us?" Elliot stared at him in disbelief. "You really want to ask me that?" Adrian looked devastated instantly. Damien's expression hardened into cold realization. Lucian looked furious, though Elliot could not tell whether the anger was directed at himself or the situation. Before anyone could speak again, the television mounted above the counter suddenly switched to breaking local news. 3 senior members of the Moretti organization remain missing tonight after another financial collapse connected to the Vale Syndicate. Every customer in the diner visibly stiffened. Elliot's stomach dropped. The Moretti family. Of course. The same organization that spent the last year fighting quietly against the Vale Empire for territory control. Damien noticed his reaction immediately. "What is wrong?" Elliot said nothing. Too late. Lucian stepped closer, voice dangerously calm now. "Elliot." Fear crawled cold beneath Elliot's skin. Because 2 nights ago, a man wearing a Moretti ring walked into the diner asking strange questions about a pregnant Omega living alone downtown. At the time, Elliot convinced himself it meant nothing. But now, staring at the 3 most powerful alphas in the city while carrying their unborn heirs, terror slowly settled into his chest like ice. Damien saw it happen in real time. His entire posture changed instantly. Predator sharp. Focused. Protective. "Who has seen you?" he asked quietly. Elliot's silence answered for him. And for the first time since walking into the diner, all 3 Vale triplets looked genuinely afraid. The temperature inside the diner suddenly felt 10 degrees colder after Damien's question. Elliot could practically hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears while snow continued drifting softly outside the windows, unaware that his entire world had just started collapsing. He tightened his grip against the edge of the booth to steady himself, but another painful pressure rolled low through his stomach, stealing the air from his lungs for a second. Adrian noticed immediately. "You are having contractions." Elliot shook his head too quickly. No, Lucian stared at him in disbelief. "Elliot, they are not real contractions," he snapped nervously. "The doctor said false labor happens near the end." Damien's expression darkened further. "How long has that been happening?" Elliot looked away instead of answering. That silence alone said enough. Rosie muttered something under her breath behind the counter before disappearing into the kitchen to give them privacy, dragging the remaining customers along with her excuses about free pie refills. Within seconds, the diner became eerily empty except for the 4 of them and the sound of winter wind rattling faintly against the windows. Elliot hated it. Hated being alone with them again. Hated how easily the air still bent around their presence. Damien slowly removed his black gloves 1 finger at a time, movements controlled and precise the same way Elliot remembered from before. It always meant he was thinking too hard, planning too much. "Tell me exactly what happened 2 nights ago," Damien said quietly. Elliot's stomach tightened harder than before. Nothing happened. Lucian gave him a look sharp enough to cut through steel. "You just reacted to the Moretti name like someone threatened you." "I said it was nothing. And I said I do not believe you." Adrian stepped closer before Lucian could escalate further. "Please," Adrian said softly. "We cannot protect you if we do not know what is happening." Protect. The word nearly shattered something inside Elliot because for months he had survived entirely alone. Alone during doctor appointments. Alone carrying groceries up icy apartment stairs. Alone, waking up terrified after nightmares about giving birth with nobody beside him. Alone every single time the babies kicked hard enough to remind him he was responsible for 3 tiny lives with no safety net left. He looked at them now, standing beneath dim diner lights in expensive coats worth more than 3 months of his rent, and bitterness rose painfully in his chest. "You do not get to act protective now," Elliot whispered. Adrian flinched visibly. Damien stayed completely still. Lucien looked furious for half a second before guilt slowly replaced it. Elliot's eyes burned with exhaustion. "I heard you," he admitted quietly. "Back then, before I left." Damien frowned slightly. "Heard what?" Elliot laughed once without humor. "You discussing what would happen if I got pregnant." Lucien immediately looked confused. Adrian's expression shifted into sudden alarm. Damien's eyes narrowed carefully. Elliot continued before he lost the nerve. "You said heirs would create vulnerability, that enemies would use them against the family." Lucien swore softly under his breath. Adrian looked horrified. Damien's voice stayed calm, but Elliot could hear something dangerous underneath it now. "You left because of one conversation?" "Because I was scared." The honesty in his own voice shocked him. "I was already pregnant when I overheard it." Silence crushed the diner again. Elliot pressed a shaking hand against his stomach as another movement rolled beneath the baby's shifting weight. "I thought eventually you would see them as liabilities too." Adrian looked devastated. "Elliot, that conversation was about security planning. How was I supposed to know that?" Elliot's voice cracked. "I was 24 years old, terrified, carrying triplets, and living inside a world where everyone solved problems with power and control." Damien closed his eyes briefly, like the confession physically hurt him. "You should have come to us." Elliot stared at him in disbelief. "You really think I trusted my judgment at that point?" Lucien dragged one hand through his dark hair in frustration before pacing once beside the booth. For someone normally so composed in dangerous situations, he suddenly looked completely overwhelmed. "You disappeared without a trace," he muttered. "Do you know what that year was like?" Elliot almost laughed again. Because yes, he actually did. Every lonely second of it. Adrian crouched carefully beside the booth now, lowering himself enough that he no longer towered over Elliot. The gentleness nearly hurt worse than Lucien's anger. "Look at me," Adrian said quietly. Elliot resisted for a moment before finally meeting his eyes. Adrian's voice softened further. "We searched for you for 11 months. Elliot's breath caught. Damien looked toward the snowy window while speaking. "Every airport, every private clinic, every financial record connected to your name." Lucien stopped pacing completely. "I nearly burned down half the city trying to find out who helped you disappear." Elliot stared at them speechless. His Omega instincts reacted immediately to the sincerity pouring through their sense now. Not manipulation, not anger, genuine fear, genuine panic, genuine relief that he was alive. The babies shifted strongly again beneath his hand, almost responding to the emotional shift in the room. Adrian noticed first. His expression melted completely as he stared at Elliot's stomach. "They are listening to us." Elliot looked down instinctively. Another tiny kick pressed visibly against the stretched fabric of his uniform. Lucien froze beside the counter like he forgot how to move. Damien stared openly this time, all cold control briefly disappearing from his face. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then the front bell above the diner door suddenly chimed again. Every alpha instinct in the room snapped into focus instantly. Damien turned first. Lucien's posture sharpened dangerously. Adrian rose slowly to his feet. A man wearing a gray winter coat stepped inside, holding snow on his shoulders and a cell phone pressed to his ear. He stopped the second he noticed the veiled triplets standing inside the diner. Elliot's blood turned cold immediately, because he recognized the silver ring on the man's hand. Moretti. The moment Elliot recognized the silver Moretti ring, pure panic crashed through his body hard enough to make his vision blur. His hand flew protectively over his stomach while instinct screamed at him to run, but at 9 months pregnant, there was nowhere left to run anymore. The man near the entrance froze too, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly when he realized exactly who stood inside the diner. Not just Elliot. The veiled triplets. Damien moved first. Calm. Controlled. Terrifyingly quiet. He stepped slightly in front of Elliot without making it obvious, expensive black coat brushing against the edge of the booth as his broad frame blocked direct line of sight toward the Omega behind him. Lucien shifted closer toward the diner entrance at the same time, cutting off the easiest exit with casual precision. Adrian stayed near Elliot, protective without crowding him. The Moretti man slowly lowered the cell phone from his ear. Nobody spoke for 2 long seconds. Snow drifted softly outside the windows while the neon diner lights buzzed overhead, but inside the room the tension felt suffocating. Then the stranger forced an awkward smile. Bad weather tonight. Lucien's expression remained completely unreadable. You should leave. The man glanced briefly toward Elliot's stomach before looking away too quickly. Damien noticed immediately. Elliot knew because the temperature in the room somehow seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I was just stopping for coffee, the stranger said carefully. Adrian finally spoke, voice smooth and polite in a way that somehow felt even more dangerous. Then you have terrible timing. Elliot's breathing became uneven as another painful tightening rolled through his abdomen. He pressed his lips together hard, trying not to react, but Adrian instantly looked down in alarm. Elliot. Damien turned immediately. What is wrong? Nothing. Elliot whispered weakly, though his face had already gone pale. Lucien's attention snapped toward him at once, all focus on the stranger disappearing. You are shaking. Elliot hated that they noticed everything. Hated that his body still responded instinctively to their attention. Another pressure tightened painfully around his lower stomach before easing again, enough to make him grip the booth edge harder. Rosie suddenly emerged from the kitchen carrying a coffee pot, took one look at the atmosphere inside the diner, and immediately turned around again without saying a word. Smart woman. Damien crouched slightly in front of Elliot now, gray eyes sharp with concern. How far apart? Elliot blinked at him. What? The contractions. Elliot looked away. I do not know. Lucien swore quietly under his breath, while Adrian's face tightened with visible fear. The Moretti man, near the entrance, slowly took one step backward toward the door, clearly realizing he had walked into something dangerous. Damien never even looked at him. You are going to the hospital. Elliot immediately shook his head. No. 3 alpha voices answered at once. Yes. Elliot nearly flinched at the force behind it. I cannot afford a hospital stay, he admitted softly. Silence hit the room again. Adrian looked heartbroken. Lucien looked genuinely offended by the sentence itself. Damien closed his eyes briefly, like he was trying to contain something dangerous beneath the surface. Elliot, Damien said carefully, you never needed to worry about money. That stopped being true when I left. Lucien stepped closer instantly. You left with nothing? Elliot stayed silent. That answer was enough. Adrian sat slowly beside him in the booth now, close enough for Elliot to feel warmth radiating from his body through the freezing exhaustion settling deeper into his bones. Why did you not ask anyone for help? Adrian asked quietly. Elliot laughed weakly under his breath. Who exactly was I supposed to ask? The fathers of my babies who thought children would become weaknesses. Adrian looked physically pained by the reminder. Damien's jaw tightened sharply. Lucien dragged both hands through his dark hair in frustration before suddenly turning toward the diner entrance. Get out, he told the Moretti man coldly. The stranger did not argue this time. He left immediately, disappearing back into the snowstorm outside. Elliot's stomach dropped watching him go. Because now somebody knew. Somebody had seen him with the veiled triplets while visibly pregnant. Damien was clearly thinking the same thing. His voice turned dangerously calm. He cannot leave this block unwatched. Lucien immediately pulled out his phone. Elliot's pulse quickened instantly. No. All 3 alphas turned toward him. Elliot shook his head hard despite another wave of pain twisting low through his abdomen. No more people. No more guards following me. That is exactly what will attract attention. Damien stared at him for a long moment. Elliot, I survived this long by staying invisible. Adrian's expression softened painfully. You were never invisible to us. Elliot looked away before that sentence could affect him too much. Outside, snow continued falling heavier now, coating the streets in. White while distant sirens echoed somewhere across the city. The babies suddenly shifted hard all at once beneath Elliot's stomach, enough to make him gasp quietly. Lucien froze beside the counter. Adrian instinctively reached toward Elliot's stomach before stopping himself at the last second. Damien noticed the entire interaction silently. Elliot's breathing turned shaky. They have been more active tonight. Adrian's eyes softened immediately. They can smell us. That realization changed something in the room. Elliot saw it happen across all three alpha faces at once. Fear slowly giving way to something deeper. Something instinctive. These were not abstract children anymore. Not hypothetical heirs discussed in security meetings. Their unborn babies were here. Alive. Close enough to kick beneath Elliot's skin whenever their fathers spoke. Lucien looked completely overwhelmed by the realization. Damien carefully lowered himself into the booth across from Elliot. Expensive coat falling open slightly as snow melted against dark fabric. "You are not going home tonight," he said quietly. Elliot's stomach tightened. "Damien, someone from Moretti saw you carrying our heirs." Damien's gray eyes locked onto his steadily. "That changes everything. I am not going anywhere with you." Elliot's voice came out softer than he intended, weakened by exhaustion and the relentless pressure building through his lower back. But the second the words left his mouth, all three veiled triplets looked at him with identical expressions of disbelief. Snowstorm winds rattled against the diner windows harder now, frosting the corners of the glass, while distant headlights slid through the empty streets outside. Damien stayed seated across from him, calm and unreadable as always, but Elliot knew him too well. The dangerous stillness in Damien's posture meant his patience was disappearing. Lucien leaned against the counter with crossed arms, dark eyes locked on Elliot like he was trying to understand how someone this stubborn had survived an entire year alone. Adrian remained closest, sitting quietly beside Elliot in the booth with enough careful distance not to overwhelm him, though Elliot could still feel the steady warmth radiating from his body. "You think this is negotiable?" Lucien finally asked. Elliot looked away toward the snowy windows instead of answering. Because yes, he did think it was negotiable. He had spent 11 months surviving by making impossible decisions alone. He could survive one more night. Probably. Another painful tightening spread low through his abdomen. Elliot inhaled sharply before he could stop himself. Adrian turned immediately. That one hurt more. Elliot hated how quickly Adrian noticed things. "I am fine. You can barely breathe." "I said I am fine." Damien's voice remained calm. "False labor does not usually happen every 10 minutes. Elliot froze. "You were timing them?" "Of course I was timing them." The answer came so naturally it momentarily left Elliot speechless. Lucien pushed himself away from the counter with visible frustration. "You are carrying triplets during a snowstorm after working a 12-hour shift, while a rival organization now knows exactly who you are." He spread one hand sharply. "Explain to me how any of this sounds acceptable." Elliot rubbed one trembling hand across his tired face. "I cannot just disappear with you." Damien's gray eyes narrowed slightly. "Why not?" Elliot laughed weakly under his breath. "Because I have a job. Rent. Bills. A real life now." Silence followed. Adrian's expression softened painfully. Lucien looked outright offended again. Damien simply studied Elliot carefully for several long seconds before speaking. "You think we are going to take control away from you?" Elliot did not answer, which was answer enough. Damien leaned back slowly in the booth. "Elliot." His voice lowered slightly. "Look at me." Reluctantly, Elliot met his eyes. Damien's expression remained unreadable, but there was something quieter underneath the cold surface now. Something exhausted. "You disappeared 1 year ago carrying our children without protection, without money, and without support because you believed we would eventually see our own family as a liability." Elliot's throat tightened painfully. Damien continued carefully. "That is our failure, not yours." The words hit harder than Elliot expected. Lucien looked away toward the snowy windows with clenched jaw, while Adrian's eyes lowered quietly to Elliot's stomach. Nobody argued with Damien's statement. Nobody defended themselves. Elliot suddenly felt dangerously emotional, which was probably the hormones and exhaustion and fear mixing together into something unbearable. He pressed his hand protectively over his stomach again as the babies shifted restlessly beneath the stretched diner uniform. "I do not know how to trust this," he admitted quietly. Adrian looked back up immediately. "Then let us earn it." Elliot nearly broke from how sincere that sounded. Before he could respond, the overhead lights inside the diner flickered once. Then again. Rosie poked her head nervously from the kitchen. "Storm is messing with the power lines again." Lucien instantly checked his phone screen. Damien's expression sharpened. Adrian's posture changed subtly beside Elliot. Every alpha instinct in the room suddenly felt alert again. Elliot noticed it too. The atmosphere had shifted. "What is wrong?" he asked quietly. Lucien stared at his phone for another second before looking toward Damien. The Moretti contact who entered the diner just disappeared from surveillance 3 blocks south. Elliot's blood went cold. Damien stood immediately. How long ago? Less than 4 minutes. Adrian cursed softly under his breath for the first time that night. Elliot's pulse started racing again. "You think he called someone?" Damien grabbed his coat from the booth without taking his eyes off the window. "I think rival organizations do not ignore the sudden appearance of 3 unborn Veil heirs." The sentence made the diner feel 10 times smaller. Elliot instinctively wrapped both arms protectively around his stomach as if he could physically shield the babies from the outside world. Lucien noticed immediately. Something in his expression softened for half a second before hardening again into focus. "We are leaving now." Elliot shook his head. "Damien, now, Elliot." This time Damien sounded every inch like the man entire cities feared. Calm. Cold. Absolute. Elliot's Omega instincts reacted instantly to the command hidden beneath his tone, sending a sharp wave of heat through his chest that made his pulse stumble. Adrian saw the panic flicker across Elliot's face and immediately stepped in. "Hey." His voice softened again. "Nobody is forcing you." Lucien looked like he wanted to argue with that statement, but wisely stayed quiet. Adrian continued carefully. "But please understand something." He glanced toward Elliot's stomach. "You are not only protecting yourself anymore." That landed exactly where it hurt most. Elliot lowered his eyes toward the curve of his belly while another tiny kick pressed visibly beneath the fabric. 3 babies. 3 innocent lives completely dependent on him making the right decisions. Fear wrapped tightly around his ribs. Damien's phone suddenly vibrated once in his coat pocket. He checked the screen. Every trace of warmth vanished from his face immediately. They already found Elliot's apartment. Silence crushed the diner. Elliot stopped breathing. Lucien's eyes darkened instantly. Adrian looked genuinely alarmed now. Damien slowly lifted his gaze toward Elliot. "You are coming with us." The drive through Blackwater City felt unreal to Elliot, like stepping back into a life he had spent an entire year trying to forget. Snowstorm winds swept across the empty streets while black SUVs moved silently through downtown traffic, headlights reflecting across icy pavement and towering glass buildings. Elliot sat in the back seat wrapped in one of Adrian's heavy wool coats because his diner uniform was too thin against the cold, though the warmth barely touched the fear tightening inside his chest. Damien sat beside him, calm and unreadable while typing short instructions into his phone every few minutes. Lucien drove. Adrian stayed close enough on Elliot's other side that their shoulders brushed whenever the vehicle turned. The babies had not stopped moving since they left the diner. Every shift beneath Elliot's stretched stomach felt stronger now, restless and reactive to the tension surrounding them. One tiny kick pressed visibly near the top of his belly, and Adrian immediately looked down. The softness that crossed his expression lasted only a second before concern returned again. How long since the last contraction? Elliot rubbed one tired hand across his stomach before answering quietly. Maybe 15 minutes. Lucien looked up sharply through the rearview mirror. That is not false labor anymore. It still could be. Damien finally looked away from his phone. Elliot. The calm warning in his voice made Elliot fall silent. Exhaustion settled heavier across his body with every passing block. His lower back hurt constantly now, and sitting upright inside the SUV only added pressure beneath the baby's weight. He hated that the triplets noticed every tiny sign of discomfort immediately. Adrian quietly adjusted the coat around Elliot's shoulders without asking. Damien handed him a bottle of water 5 minutes later. Lucien lowered the vehicle heat when Elliot admitted he felt overheated. It was all so instinctive, so natural, as if this year apart had never happened at all. Elliot stared out the window toward the city skyline, glowing through falling snow, and tried not to let it affect him. Your apartment was cleared before Moretti reached it, Damien said suddenly. Elliot blinked. Cleared. Everything important was removed. Elliot stared at him in confusion. How would you know what was important? Lucien answered from the front seat without looking back. Because Adrian already sent people there. Elliot turned sharply toward Adrian. Adrian looked slightly guilty. I packed the baby things. Elliot's throat tightened unexpectedly. You found the nursery? Adrian smiled softly for the first time that night. 3 cribs in one tiny apartment was difficult to miss. Elliot looked away immediately before emotion could show too clearly on his face. He had spent months building that little nursery alone. 3 second-hand cribs painted white by hand, because buying new furniture cost too much. Tiny knitted blankets Rosie helped him make during slow diner nights. A cheap moon-shaped nightlight hanging above the cribs because he wanted the babies to sleep peacefully even if their apartment was small. The idea of strangers seeing that private little space made Elliot feel strangely vulnerable. Did you really paint stars on the ceiling? Lucien asked suddenly, sounding almost disbelieving. Elliot's face immediately heated. Adrian was not supposed to tell you that. Lucien actually laughed softly under his breath for the first time since entering the diner hours ago. Triplets, he muttered. You painted an entire galaxy for triplets. Elliot crossed both arms protectively over his stomach despite the movement making his back ache. I wanted them to have something pretty. Silence followed again, but this time it felt different. Quieter. Softer somehow. Damien watched Elliot carefully for several long moments before speaking again. You prepared for them alone. Elliot stared down at his hands instead of answering. The city outside slowly changed as the SUVs moved farther north. Streets became cleaner. Buildings taller. Security checkpoints appeared near private entrances surrounded by black marble and silver lights. Elliot recognized the neighborhood instantly. Wealth. Old money. Dangerous power hidden beneath beautiful architecture. His stomach tightened with something colder than fear now. Memory. The SUV finally turned into a private underground garage beneath a towering glass building Elliot knew too well. Vale Tower. Home. Or at least it used to be. The second the vehicle stopped moving, anxiety crashed through Elliot hard enough to make his pulse spike. No, he whispered suddenly. All 3 alphas turned toward him instantly. Elliot shook his head hard while panic climbed painfully into his chest. I cannot stay here. Adrian reached toward him carefully. Elliot, this place is exactly the same. His voice cracked unexpectedly. Nothing changed. Damien's expression softened slightly. Everything changed. Elliot laughed weakly, almost breathless from hormones and exhaustion and fear. You really think bringing me back to the place where I fell apart is helping? Lucien's face tightened immediately. Adrian looked heartbroken again. Damien stayed silent for a moment before quietly opening his own coat sleeve and rolling the fabric upward just enough to expose the inside of his wrist. Elliot froze instantly. 3 thin silver lines crossed Damien's skin there. Scars. Old bonding marks. Half-healed. Elliot's breathing stopped completely. Slowly, Lucien lifted his sleeve too. Then Adrian. Matching scars. Matching damage. Elliot stared at them in shock. What? Adrian's voice came quietly. The bond backlash after you disappeared nearly killed us. Elliot felt like the air vanished from his lungs. Omega bonds were emotional. Instinctive. Soul deep. Breaking them violently could damage both sides permanently if the connection had grown strong enough. Elliot knew that, but he never imagined. Damien gently lowered his sleeve again. Nothing stayed the same after you left. Elliot's eyes burned painfully. Before he could respond, another contraction hit suddenly, stronger than every previous one combined. Pain wrapped tightly around his abdomen hard enough to steal the breath from his chest. Elliot folded forward instinctively with a sharp inhale while one trembling hand gripped the seat beside him. Adrian immediately moved closer. Elliot. Lucien was already out of the driver's seat opening the back door before the contraction even fully passed. Damien touched Elliot's shoulder carefully for the first time that night. We need to get you upstairs. Elliot looked up weakly, exhausted beyond words now. Snow swirled outside the open car door while warm golden light spilled down from the private elevator entrance above them. Safe. Warm. Home. Terrifyingly familiar. And somewhere deep beneath the fear still clawing through his chest, Elliot realized the babies had finally stopped moving restlessly, as if they already knew they had reached somewhere protected. The private elevator ride to the penthouse felt unbearably quiet except for the soft mechanical hum beneath their feet and Elliot's uneven breathing. Warm golden light reflected across polished steel walls while snow continued falling beyond the glass skyline outside. Elliot leaned back carefully against the elevator railing with one hand pressed against the underside of his stomach, trying to breathe through another tightening contraction that wrapped painfully across his abdomen before slowly easing again. Adrian stood directly beside him now, close enough to steady him without touching unless necessary. Lucian remained near the elevator doors with tense shoulders and folded arms, though his eyes kept drifting back toward Elliot every few seconds. Damien stayed calm as always, but his phone had not stopped vibrating since they left the diner. Elliot noticed every message made Damien's expression colder. The elevator finally opened into the penthouse. Elliot's breath caught instantly despite himself. Nothing about the space had changed. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline of Blackwater City, while soft amber lighting reflected against white marble floors and dark glass walls. Expensive art still lined the hallway. The scent of cedarwood and smoke still lingered faintly through the air. Even the oversized black couch near the fireplace remained exactly where Elliot remembered. Memory hit him so hard his knees nearly weakened. He remembered sleeping there tangled between warm alpha bodies after long nights, when the city below felt impossibly far away. He remembered laughing in the kitchen at 3 a.m. while Adrian tried teaching him how to make pasta from scratch. He remembered sitting beside the windows during thunderstorms with Lucian silently reading nearby because neither of them liked loud parties. He remembered Damien pulling him into his lap during difficult meetings simply because the Alpha sensed Elliot was anxious before he even spoke. Home. The realization hurt too much. Elliot looked away quickly before emotion could fully rise into his throat. "Your room is ready," Damien said quietly. Elliot blinked in confusion. "My room?" Adrian exchanged a quick glance with his brothers before answering softly. "We kept it exactly the same." Elliot stared at them speechless. 1 year. 1 entire year, and nobody touched his room. His Omega instincts reacted so strongly to that realization that tears instantly burned behind his eyes. Lucian noticed first and immediately looked away toward the windows, pretending not to see. Damien stepped closer instead. "You are exhausted." Elliot swallowed hard and nodded weakly because denying it felt pointless now. His entire body hurt. His lower back burned constantly beneath the baby's weight, and the contractions had started coming close enough together that he could no longer fully relax between them. Adrian carefully guided Elliot down the hallway while Damien and Lucian stayed several steps behind, quietly discussing security details Elliot could barely focus on anymore through exhaustion. The bedroom door opened slowly. Elliot froze in the doorway. Everything truly remained untouched. The soft gray blankets. The books stacked beside the bed. The moon-shaped lamp Elliot once insisted on buying because the penthouse felt too cold at night. Even the oversized sweater he accidentally left draped across a chair 1 year ago still hung there untouched. Adrian watched Elliot carefully from beside him. Damien would not let anyone move anything. Elliot's chest tightened painfully. "Why?" Adrian smiled sadly. "Because he thought you would come home eventually." Elliot could not speak for several seconds. Another contraction suddenly tightened hard enough to interrupt his thoughts entirely. He grabbed the doorframe with a sharp inhale while pain wrapped low across his stomach and lower spine. Adrian immediately steadied him with gentle hands at his waist. "Easy." Lucian appeared beside them instantly. "That one was worse." Elliot nodded weakly through clenched teeth. Damien checked the time automatically. 7 minutes apart now. Elliot looked exhausted suddenly. "I do not want to go to a hospital." Silence followed. Adrian gently helped him sit on the edge of the bed before crouching carefully in front of him. "Why?" Elliot stared down at his trembling hands. "Because hospitals make it real." His voice cracked softly. "I have spent months pretending I could survive this alone." Lucian sat quietly in the chair near the window while Damien remained standing near the doorway, both unusually silent. Adrian's expression softened almost painfully. "You are not alone anymore." Elliot looked away because hearing that felt dangerous. His Omega instincts already felt too raw tonight. Too vulnerable after being surrounded again by familiar scents and familiar voices and memories he never truly stopped loving. Damien's phone vibrated sharply again. This time his expression changed instantly after reading the screen. Lucian stood immediately. Adrian looked up in alarm. Elliot's pulse quickened. "What happened?" Damien slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Moretti moved people into the Northern District." Lucien's jaw tightened sharply. They know he is here. Elliot's stomach dropped. Adrian rose slowly to his feet beside the bed. How? Damien's voice turned cold. Someone inside the diner leaked information after we left. Fear wrapped around Elliot's chest again so fast he almost felt dizzy. Instinctively, both hands moved protectively over his stomach. The babies immediately shifted hard beneath his touch, reacting to the sudden panic flooding his pheromones. Lucien noticed instantly. Do not stress him. Damien looked furious at the situation, not Elliot. The penthouse security is already doubled. Adrian sat beside Elliot carefully now, one warm hand resting lightly against the mattress near his thigh without touching him directly. You are safe here. Elliot wanted desperately to believe that. Outside the windows, snow continued falling across the city while distant sirens echoed faintly below. Warm firelight flickered softly across the bedroom walls, but tension still pressed heavily through the penthouse air. Elliot suddenly realized something terrifying then. He no longer feared the veiled triplets. He feared losing them again. The realization hit so hard it nearly stole his breath. Before he could process it, another contraction crashed through him violently enough to make him gasp aloud. Adrian immediately caught him as Elliot folded forward slightly. Lucien crossed the room in 2 seconds flat. Damien was already checking the time again. Elliot's breathing turned shaky. That one, he swallowed hard. That one really hurt. Damien's face went completely still. 5 minutes apart. By 3 in the morning, the storm outside had buried half the city beneath snow, and Elliot could no longer pretend the contractions were slowing down. The penthouse had transformed completely over the last few hours. Warm lights glowed through every hallway while medical staff quietly moved through the private residence carrying supplies and speaking in calm, low voices. Damien refused to take Elliot to a public hospital after learning Moretti associates were monitoring emergency admissions across the city, so an entire maternity team had been brought directly into Vale Tower instead. Elliot still could not fully process that kind of power. He sat propped carefully against soft pillows in his old bedroom, while another contraction slowly tightened through his body hard enough to steal his breath again. Adrian stayed beside him immediately, one hand gently supporting Elliot's shoulder while helping him breathe through the pain. Slow breaths, Adrian whispered softly. You are doing good. Elliot nodded weakly despite sweat dampening his hairline now. His entire body felt exhausted. Every muscle ached from hours of labor, and the weight of carrying triplets already strained him before contractions even began. Damien stood near the foot of the bed speaking quietly with the lead doctor, while Lucien paced endlessly near the windows like a caged storm barely holding itself together. Every few minutes one of them checked on Elliot. Every few minutes another contraction came. 6 centimeters, the doctor explained calmly after another examination. Progress is steady, but with triplets we still need to monitor carefully. Elliot barely heard the rest through exhaustion. He closed his eyes briefly while one trembling hand rested protectively over the curve of his stomach. The babies still moved constantly beneath his skin, though now the movements felt lower. He had spent months imagining this moment completely alone in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, terrified of everything that could go wrong. Instead, he was here surrounded by warmth and familiar scents, and 3 overprotective alphas who looked ready to tear apart the universe itself every time Elliot winced in pain. Lucien stopped pacing long enough to kneel beside the bed during the next contraction. You need anything? Elliot almost laughed weakly despite the pain. A new spine, maybe. Lucien actually smiled for half a second before concern immediately returned again. Damien dismissed the medical staff briefly after confirming everything remained stable, wanting Elliot to rest between contractions while preparations continued in the adjoining suite. The second the room quieted, Elliot finally looked toward all 3 alphas properly. Adrian sat closest with exhausted eyes and rolled up sleeves like he had forgotten appearance mattered hours ago. Lucien still looked tense enough to shatter glass, just from breathing too hard. Damien remained calm on the surface, but Elliot noticed the way his fingers flexed slightly every time another contraction started. Fear. They were terrified too. Elliot swallowed hard. You really stayed bonded after I left? Silence filled the room instantly. Adrian looked down first. Lucien rubbed one hand across his jaw before answering quietly. None of us could break it. Damien finally stepped closer to the bed. We tried to stabilize the damage. Elliot's chest tightened painfully. Because you hated me? Adrian's head snapped upward immediately. Elliot. The hurt in Adrian's voice alone answered the question before anyone else spoke. Damien sat carefully beside the bed for the first time that night, close enough for Elliot to feel warmth radiating through his shirt sleeves. We thought you died. Elliot stared at him speechless. Damien's expression remained controlled, but his voice lowered quietly. Your scent vanished overnight. Your phone disappeared. Every financial trail ended. Lucien looked away toward the windows again. The car accident near the harbor happened 2 days later. Elliot froze. Adrian nodded weakly beside him. There was an Omega body recovered after the fire. Elliot's stomach dropped. You thought it was me? Silence answered again. Lucien finally spoke without turning around. Damien identified the body himself because none of us trusted anyone else to do it. Elliot felt tears burn instantly behind his eyes. He remembered hearing about that accident on local news while hiding inside his apartment months ago, never imagining the triplets connected it to him. Damien's voice stayed calm despite the grief buried underneath it. The DNA did not match. Elliot looked down immediately because suddenly breathing felt difficult for entirely different reasons now. Adrian gently brushed damp hair back from Elliot's forehead. We never stopped looking for you. Another contraction suddenly crashed through Elliot before he could answer. This one stronger than before, sharp enough to pull a broken sound from his throat, while pain wrapped fiercely across his abdomen and lower back. Damien immediately leaned forward. Lucien crossed the room in seconds. Adrian held Elliot carefully while helping him breathe through it. Easy, Adrian whispered. You are okay. Elliot gripped Adrian's sleeve tightly as the contraction intensified harder than any previous one. Pressure built low through his body so intensely it made panic rise into his chest. Something changed, Elliot gasped weakly. The doctor immediately returned after hearing the strain in his voice. One quick examination changed the atmosphere in the entire room instantly. The first baby is moving into position. Lucien went completely still. Adrian visibly lost color. Damien's expression sharpened into terrifying focus. Elliot's pulse raced uncontrollably. Already. The doctor nodded calmly. It is time. Fear crashed through Elliot so hard, he almost stopped breathing entirely. He looked helplessly between the 3 alphas surrounding the bed. Damien immediately took one of Elliot's trembling hands without hesitation. Lucien moved protectively to the opposite side. Adrian pressed his forehead gently against Elliot's for one brief, steadying moment. You are not doing this alone, Adrian whispered softly. Outside the penthouse windows, snow continued falling over Blackwater City, while inside the room the first cries of their children were suddenly only moments away. The first cry shattered something inside Damien Vale that years of power, violence, and absolute control had never managed to touch. The sound was tiny, fragile, perfect. Elliot barely had enough strength left to lift his head from the pillows when the doctor carefully placed the first baby against his chest wrapped in a warm white blanket. Tears instantly blurred Elliot's vision the second he saw him. A little boy with dark hair already, visible beneath a tiny knit cap and soft silver gray eyes barely beginning to open. Healthy, the doctor said gently. Strong heartbeat. Elliot let out a broken breath that sounded dangerously close to a sob. Damien stood frozen beside the bed staring at the child like the entire world had stopped turning. Lucien had both hands pressed against the back of his neck as if he physically could not process what he was seeing. Adrian looked openly emotional for the first time in Elliot's life, silver eyes bright with tears he was no longer trying to hide. The room still smelled softly of cedarwood and winter rain, mixed with the warm, comforting scent of newborn babies and exhausted Omega pheromones. Outside the penthouse windows, snow continued drifting silently over Blackwater City while inside everything had changed forever. Elliot looked down at the tiny boy sleeping against his chest, and suddenly all the fear from the last year hit him at once. Every lonely doctor appointment, every night spent terrified he would fail them somehow. Every moment he sat alone in that tiny apartment building cribs with shaking hands while wondering if his babies would hate him one day for growing up without fathers. None of it mattered anymore, because they were here, safe, alive, loved. Another tiny cry filled the room seconds later as the second baby arrived. Lucien immediately moved forward this time before he could stop himself. The doctor carefully transferred the smaller newborn into his arms after checking him over. Lucien stared down at the tiny bundle like someone had handed him something sacred. Elliot had never seen that expression on his face before. Wonder. Pure overwhelming wonder. "He has your eyes," Adrian whispered softly. Lucien swallowed hard without looking up. "No," he said quietly. "He has Elliot's mouth." Elliot laughed weakly through exhausted tears. The sound broke whatever control remained in the room. Adrian sat carefully beside the bed and leaned down enough to kiss Elliot's damp forehead, while the third baby's cries suddenly joined the others. 3 tiny newborn voices echoed softly through the penthouse bedroom while snowstorm winds rattled faintly against the windows far outside. Damien finally moved then. Slowly, carefully, like he was afraid the moment might disappear if he breathed too hard. The doctor placed the final baby into his arms, and the terrifying Alpha who ruled half the city immediately looked completely undone. Damien stared down at the smallest baby in silence for several long seconds before lowering himself slowly into the chair beside Elliot's bed. Elliot watched him carefully through exhaustion while Damien adjusted the blanket with hands that suddenly looked almost unsteady. "Hi," Damien whispered softly to the baby. Elliot's heart shattered completely at the sound, because Damien Vale did not speak softly to anyone, ever. Yet now his entire world had reduced itself down to a 7-pound newborn sleeping peacefully against his chest. Adrian carefully brushed damp hair away from Elliot's face again, while the doctor quietly finished checking monitors nearby. "You did incredible," Adrian whispered. Elliot closed his eyes briefly, exhausted beyond words now. "Are they really okay?" Lucien immediately answered from beside the bed, still holding the second baby like he would protect him from the universe itself. "Perfect." Damien looked toward Elliot then, really looked at him. Pale, exhausted, sweaty curls sticking to his forehead, arms trembling from hours of labor. And somehow still the most beautiful thing Damien had ever seen. Slowly, Damien stood from the chair and crossed the short distance to the bed, carrying the sleeping newborn carefully against his chest. Then, in complete silence, the most feared Alpha in Blackwater City lowered himself onto one knee beside Elliot's bed. Lucien froze instantly. Adrian's breath caught softly. Elliot stared at Damien in complete shock. Damien's gray eyes never left Elliot's face. "I failed you once," he said quietly. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure it never happens again." Elliot's throat tightened painfully. Damien continued softly while their sleeping son rested against his chest. "You gave us a family when we deserved nothing from you." Tears slid silently down Elliot's face. Lucien carefully moved closer beside the bed holding the second baby while Adrian settled near Elliot's shoulder with the third newborn sleeping peacefully in his arms. 3 powerful alphas surrounding one exhausted Omega and the tiny lives they created together. Family. Real family. Elliot looked at each of them slowly while warmth spread painfully through his chest. "I was so scared," he admitted quietly. Adrian immediately pressed a soft kiss against Elliot's temple. "You do not have to be scared anymore." Hours later, long after the medical staff quietly left and the storm outside finally began to calm, the penthouse settled into peaceful silence. 3 newborn cribs now stood beside the fireplace in Elliot's bedroom because Lucien refused to let the babies out of sight tonight. Soft moonlight reflected across marble floors while the city glowed quietly below the windows. Elliot woke briefly sometime near dawn to find the bed empty beside him. Panic flickered instinctively through his chest until he noticed movement near the cribs. Damien sat asleep in the armchair holding one baby against his chest. Adrian slept on the rug beside the fireplace with another newborn curled safely against him. Lucien remained awake near the windows, arms crossed protectively, while watching snow fall across Blackwater City and keeping silent guard over all of them. The city feared the Vale triplets. But in the quiet golden light of early morning, surrounded by sleeping babies and soft blankets and exhausted love, they no longer looked like kings of a criminal empire. They simply looked like fathers.